by the military-industrial complex.
It could be seen to move violently forward, violently forward, violently forward.
I'm just a patsy.
Like when they attack.
I said this once or twice, but it bears repeating. If you like your current insurance, you will keep your current insurance.
You think about the Army and the Navy and the missions they run to protect the world, they run on SAP.
Well, you have done a really spectacular job. I guess pretty much everybody at this table is your customer, so
Exactly.
That's not so bad.
Exactly.
I want to congratulate
Thank you, Mr. President. Thanks, you.
And we're back. Welcome back, Mathew Crawford. We're so happy to have you back here today.
Well, thanks for inviting me.
Oh, you're welcome. I just want to let everybody know that you can find Mathew at roundingtheearth.substack.com, and you can subscribe to his channel and support him there. And you can support this channel by going to thedukereport.substack.com. And I'll clear the decks of the housekeeping and just ask you how you've been and what have you been working on, because you've been a little mysterious to the internet lately.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it was 18-ish months ago. I stopped writing mostly on Rounding the Earth. I've still done a whole lot of reading and collecting information since then. But I did spend most of the last, 13-ish months sort of working aside as a professional gambler, because it's something where my talents, my skill set fits. And, after doing mostly pro bono work for 5 years, it seemed like a good idea to refresh some income. But honestly, I was just tired. I was absolutely physically exhausted to the point of sickness. And really, I just wanted to step aside and recover my health more than anything. But I'll probably start writing again very soon at Rounding the Earth for those people who are interested or used to follow, the 700 articles that I wrote there.
Well, you look quite healthy.
I feel healthier.
Yeah. So, you and I, one of the things I've armed my wife today with a pile of washcloths, and I've instructed her that if I interrupt too much, that she's to fling one at me. So if you see things flying from the side of the screen hitting me, that's what it's all. That's what's going on there.
I thought maybe you just needed a washcloth anytime you talk about Epstein.
I just needed something that she could throw at me that wouldn't hurt when it hit me. Talking about Epstein. So where do you want to start with Epstein today?
Yeah, there's been it's aggravating me so much that I think I'm just going to have to write about it. And you and I have been discussing some related topics on the phone, and so it just kind of, it was just an itch that we had to talk about, some of this, and I have so much information that I don't even have, in notes that I need to transfer to my computer. That the picture is actually still forming for me, but it was maybe late 2022. I started to think, gosh, this Jeffrey Epstein story is connected to the pandemic. And it was like there were little ties in there. The MIT tie is a big thing because, MIT, Harvard, that's where you've got George Church, who's like the father of genetic engineering going on in there. And I had somebody send me kind of an anonymous tip. I never found out who it was who sent it to me, but somebody said, you should be looking into human cloning centers. And they even sent me a picture that they claimed to be a human cloning center. And I was never able to figure out where this picture was, and I was never able to find out further information. I looked for it. I actually spent several weeks trying to figure out, what was going on, and but there were all these kinds of little connections that said, yeah, this is related. And I'm going to step back and mention this for any viewers who don't know me, and I have not talked. I've talked and written some about this background, but there's so much to even explain the connection that it would take a book. But when I was growing up, my parents were involved in what could be described as a neo-theosophy cult called the Association for Research and Enlightenment. And I rebelled against this as a kid. There was a lot of weird stuff going on. One of my brothers was told that he was being trained to be like almost like a messianic figure. He was told that, and understand he was a persuasive personality. He was, he was good looking, had superficial charm, musician, very talented musician, played like 40 instruments, by the time he stepped into high school. All but 3 of them completely self-taught. And but he was told that he would be one of these great psychic leaders in this sort of new world after the apocalypse came. and he was being given missions that when I look back now, like I thought it was like, it was almost insane. And I just wanted to forget about it and walk away from it, never worry about it again when I left home. But I think the pandemic brought me around to having to figure out, what was all this, and what does it actually mean in terms of what's going on. We were being told that we were being taught remote viewing by our parents, and there were a couple of military guys, well, actually more than 2, but 2 in particular, who would come to our home and give us tests. There were various sorts of tests. Some of them were just like IQ tests. Some of them were like, what does this facial expression mean? Or which of these 2 facial expressions, is anger or, different emotions. But then there were, I think they're called Zener cards. I always have to look this up. I've looked it up like 1,000 times, but matching symbols. Like, can you predict the symbol that somebody's looking at when they're looking at the card? Squares, wavy lines, and triangles and stuff. And I remember that I started rebelling against all this when it was that I recognized that they were fixing the experiments to suggest that my brother Chad had psychic powers.
Uh-huh.
And
but I'm thinking about those cards and thinking that they remind me of something else that you and I were talking about too, is that they kind of look like Phoenician sigils or runes.
Interesting. The wavy lines represent water. The square is a Masonic symbol. And the circle could be said to represent the compass. The triangle is often promoted in theosophy. They have like videos on the Theosophical channel on YouTube about triangle relationships. So it may be that all of them are actually. There are 5 symbols, and I can't remember the 5th off the top. A star. Oh, it's a 5-pointed star. Yeah, there you go. I'd never thought about it, but you're.
I didn't think about it until you just said it, and I remember those cards because I was tested. I was tested for IQ, but when you brought those cards up, it reminded me. So there was a guy named Ivar Lovas who was a senior guy at the psychology department at UCLA when I was a small child. And I was tested. That's where I got 2 IQ tests when I was like 5 or 6 years old. And they were done at Ivar's house across the street from where I lived. I didn't have to go to UCLA or anything to take the test. So, but one thing that you said though, that is something that I don't think that you and I have talked about before. And that is that you and I both, I would categorize us as having autonomous personalities. And I think that one of the things that I've been trying to reconcile in my life, kind of my Forrest Gump kind of life, is that I've been in all of these different situations. I've been in the room with all of these different people, and yet I didn't ever get the tap. I was never the Silicon Valley billionaire. I was never picked to be one of the people who gets to be, you know, on the next level.
But
and
you're clearly quite talented and accomplished with technology.
right. But I think that the reason is because I have an autonomous personality, and I think you have an autonomous personality. And I think that they select for people who do not have autonomous personalities. That's the end of my.
Well, and it may be that they also create that too. You know, one of the things that kind of freaked me out as a kid was I began recognizing patterns of sexual abuse. And part of this happened when, you know, we went and met other children who were in this quasi cult that we were in, the Association for Research and Enlightenment. I heard two girls discussing what sounded to me like sexual abuse. And it turned, you know, in 2021, you know, decades later, suddenly there's a lawsuit in Virginia Beach over, you know, dozens of people being raped at this ARE camp. And you know, so I kind of wanted to set the stage for this. I would like for people to look this up because almost nobody's heard about this, even though it should be a huge scandal. Like, this is dozens of people raped as children in an organized way at a camp in the city that is the largest U.S. military presence in the entire world, right? Virginia Beach exists as a military city. It would not exist really without the military. You know, it's got a population of like 400 something thousand. And, you know, almost every person there is, you know, military family, or, you know, maybe they're there because they work at the school or they work at a restaurant. You know, you have to have other services, right, to support anything, but it's basically a military city, and is sometimes referred to, you know, by some people as the center of the military mafia. And it is also where Fort Bragg is, which was the center of the remote viewing program. And lots of the children in the ARE were, you know, being connected to this program in one way or another. Now, I'm going to stop here for a moment and mention a few just sort of like meta details that people should understand. The remote viewing program is the one that became renamed as the Stargate Project. And after being, you know, after this renaming of the Stargate Project, suddenly you have like movies and television shows. And they have this like weird theme of like traveling through a portal to different places and different times, except that it all has these like themes of like Egyptian gods, and like there's this nemesis, you know, Egyptian ruler, like Pharaoh god that they're bumping up against when they go through the Stargate. And you know, the Theosophical Society itself was founded by a Freemason and a mystic, and you know, lots of you know, all the Masonic elements, several Masons involved there. But anyway, so that's the original Stargate.
Just sidebar note: the TV show Stargate. What the executive producer of that show was Michael Greenberg, and I know that because Michael Greenberg was married to Sharon Stone. So you can.
Whoa.
So you can put that on one of your maps.
Yeah, absolutely. So this was a program, the remote viewing program, that was developed at the Stanford Research Institute. And I'm going to pull up my map here. I should probably just show the map.
If you give me, you can. I think you can click share screen, or I can pull it up.
You know, it's been long enough since I've been in StreamYard. It looks like things are a little bit.
On the bottom, there should be a little plus symbol.
Well, I've got the screen up. I saw that, and I got the, but I forgot how to share the screen easily.
Yeah, if you look on the bottom of the StreamYard interface, there's a little plus with a little screen on it.
Oh, I hit the wrong plus. There were multiple pluses.
Yes.
Now I've got to bring back up the the window again. Let me see.
We'll get there. Well, I'll stretch for you. I'll talk for a second. So it's interesting because there's a book that I read called "Thanks for the Memories" by a woman who her pseudonym in the book is Bryce Taylor. And what's interesting when you're telling that story is the idea that I went to Taft High School in the San Fernando Valley, and it took me a long time. It's only been the last couple of years that I've come to terms with the fact that the San Fernando Valley was a very militarized psychological warfare space. It's famous for Chatsworth, California, which is where the porn industry was born. It's not where porn was born, but it's where the porn industry was. The porn industrial complex started in Chatsworth, California. And in this book, Thanks for the Memories, Bryce Taylor talks about the fact that she was trafficked. She was an MK Ultra monarch like Kathy O'Brien. And the guy who was trafficking, who was her primary handler, was my high school. I was a yell leader in high school because it was a good way to hang out with the prettiest girls in the school. And the sponsor for the yell leaders and the cheerleaders was this guy. I'm not going to name him, but his name is in the book. And he was my sponsor. He was a guy that I saw every day at school. And it turned out that after he left the Los Angeles Unified School System, he wound up becoming the owner of one of the largest day camps in California. And so I'm reminded of all of that kind of weirdness that was going on around me. And again, I used to hear stories like you're telling right now and think, what are the odds that Mathew and Peter could have similar sounding stories and be on opposite sides of the country? And it's only after I started really doing a lot of research that I started realizing this stuff is ubiquitous. It's not in just a few places.
I bet it's not entirely ubiquitous, but I do think that different places are targeted in different ways. For instance, the ARE seemed to be primarily in the southeastern United States. I know that there were pockets in Mississippi, Alabama, Virginia. I don't know exactly, where else, but
I think there's a lot of weird stuff that happens in New Mexico.
Well, yeah, I'm just saying, the ARE, yeah, absolutely. New Mexico, yeah, a lot of weird stuff there. But you can share it. Okay, I don't think that I have whatever button you just used, by the way. I think that I checked every button.
You know what? Jessica did that.
Good work, Jessica. Okay.
All right. So yeah, you could put it on the stage, and then Jessica and I could put it up. So that's the way it works.
Yeah. So understand. It would take a long time to fully understand what the Stargate Project is, what remote viewing is. But I think that it is an attempt to create a pseudoscientific sheen to claims of paranormal, ESP, precognition, all of that kind of stuff, psychic, whatever. And there was a kernel.
It's magic, kind of in the cloak of scientism.
Yeah, and people should understand what the roots of it are. I would say, theosophy is the roots, and above theosophy are the Masons. It was one of the co-founders, multiple of the co-founders were Masons, Freemasons. But it was in the British Empire where you had the spirituality movement, that centered around London and some places around there. But in particular, the people at the Stanford Research Institute doing this were, a bunch of Scientologists, or Werner Erhard, who, by the way, created, EST,
Spring.
And sometimes called, what was that changed to later? A
landmark forum,
right? I found a claim that he brought funding for the project here. Also, a guy named Harold Chipman, who was a CIA assassin, is said to have been involved in the financing of the Stanford Research Institute program. But you've got 3 Scientologists there. So 4 Scientologists, Pat Price, Ingo Swann, and Hal Puthoff. And Hal Puthoff in particular, he had very, very high security credentials. He was connected to Office of Naval Intelligence in particular. And naval intelligence will be a theme throughout a lot of this. because we're going to talk about Steve Bannon later and a bunch of other people. But Office of Naval Intelligence spawned both the Theosophical Society. One of the founders was Colonel Henry Alcott, and it spawned Scientology. L. Ron Hubbard, and a lot of people go, "Oh, L. Ron Hubbard wasn't that important." Well, he commanded 2 vessels, and he was good enough that he would jump on boats with people in Scientology and teach them how to sail in a day, right? And he wrote dozens of manuals that were used internally in Scientology, and of course, he is one of the 2 or 3 most prolific writers of all time in terms of numbers of words published. Some people, by some metrics, number 1, sometimes number 2 or 3. But he's clearly a very smart fellow, whether or not he was a megalomaniac or whatever. But so you've got these people bringing L. Ron Hubbard's ideas, and more recently, and both Joe Rogan and Eric Weinstein gave Hal Puthoff cover over this. Hal Puthoff said, "Oh, I was just very briefly involved in Scientology." No, he was OT7, top of the chain. They acted like more recently, like they weren't really testing Scientology's ideas. But if you go back to interviews in the 1970s, they absolutely say they're testing L. Ron Hubbard's ideas. So this is L. Ron Hubbard's ideas. I think psychological traps, really mind control methods. And L. Ron Hubbard did try to sell his methods of mind control. That was what he was telling governments around the world that he was selling. So let's keep that in mind. So you've got a bunch of Scientologists, and then you've got people involved in MK Ultra, Sidney Gottlieb in particular, and Jolyon West. And if there are like 3 or 4 people most important in MK Ultra, these are 2 of them right there. And Jolly West was also involved. I'll bring up his graph for a minute. Oh, that's not his graph. Darn. I do have a graph for him, but I'll go find it in a minute.
Jolly West was involved with Manson and
so many things. Many things. But the one that I was thinking of, he was involved in. He's supposed to be Scientology's chief critic is sometimes what they call them, but I think that's actually misdirection. Both because he was involved in the Remote Viewing Project, but also because he was involved with the Cult Awareness Network. And after a lawsuit with the Cult Awareness Network, Scientology took it over. So Scientology answers the phones. Scientology people answer the phones of the Cult Awareness Network and go, "No, Scientology is not a cult."
well, this is interesting, because one of the points that Kathy O'Brien makes in her book Transformation of America is that a lot of rehab centers are actually kind of catch and release centers that are designed for managing people who MK Ultra has spun out. So these people have, nervous breakdowns or other psychotic breaks.
I would be almost certain of it. And Scientology ran one. They ran Narconon.
Right.
So, but he was also associated with the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, which I think is one of the greatest travesties of justice of the 20th century, where these kids who are saying, I was raped by my father or whatever, you have these, psychiatrists come in and go, no, it was the, this or that, or, they give some other explanation. There was even somebody involved whose name we're going to see involved in the remote viewing program. Very important, wife of a U.S. general, a top general, named Rima Labo, who popped up as what I think is like a controlled opposition. I think she's counterintelligence, but she popped up on the side of people pushing back against vaccines, which we'll get to, because this is part of the whole, how does Epstein wind up connecting to all of this? So you've got Scientology, you've got MK Ultra, and you've got psychiatrists, including Jolly West. Jolly West, by the way, is the guy who interviewed Jack Ruby the day that Jack Ruby went insane, and he probably fed him some drugs or something, or pulled up some repressed memory from hypnosis. But you've also got Michael Aquino, who was one of the co-authors of Mind War paper, and his other co-author is
Vallely.
General Paul Vallely, who is
Right.
also involved with pandemic pushback organizations.
And is on the board of advisors for Turning Point USA.
It's on the board of advisors for Turning Point USA. And then you've got magicians, stage magicians. You've got Uri Geller, Russell Targ, and Russell Targ was supposed to be like he's the physicist, so he's supposed to be the person in the room who's very rigorous and all of that. And there's at least one other person. Maybe it was. Michael Aquino was a stage magician, which is interesting in and of itself, right? He was a member of the Magicians Guild.
Well, I think that makes sense, because the definition of magic that I use is when you take a self-evident truth and then you wrap it in a mystery in order to introduce a specialist in between you and the truth. The magician,
too.
Right?
Yeah,
the magician.
You expand the priest class to govern gatekeeping that kind of truth, and you have so much confusion around it that you don't have, a lot of clarity for anybody who doesn't really dig down and do a lot of good research. And a lot of research that I'm doing now couldn't have been done easily before the internet. So,
and to your point about physics, I think that's most people's relationship with physics, that there's so much conceptual math that's involved in it. And much of the math is based on philosophy, frankly. It's not really based on tangible things that you can measure. And at that point, you're kind of talking about math equations that are completely ungrounded in something that anyone can comprehend. And that turns physicists into this kind of priest class where they can talk people into giving them trillions of dollars to build things like colliders at CERN, when the people who are writing the checks and giving them the money don't actually really have a really good idea of what they're doing with it.
Yeah, and the Theosophical Society had this child messiah. What is his name?
It's Indian.
Right? Yeah, I'm having
Krishnamurti.
Jiddu Krishnamurti.
I remember the syllables.
And Krishnamurti was being raped by Charles Leadbeater when he was a kid. Who they kidnapped him and took him to London, and his father had to go get him back and deal with the courts in London. But and it was all very hidden, covered up. And it was only a few years ago that a graduate student uncovered the records and showed what had happened. But Jiddu Krishnamurti, despite having been raped, he said, "I'm not your Messiah," but he went and talked about spiritualism for the rest of his life because he had no education in anything else. And this is one of the problems with children who are involved in these MK Ultra mind programs is that they have very little connection to the rest of the world and often very little education in anything outside of what they were being specialized in as a child. But they surrounded him with all these physicists who were talking with him about quantum stuff and how this was the equivalent of spirituality, and he was just going along with it, right? And this is how you get Fritjof Capra writing the Tao of Physics. Fritjof Capra went and talked with him and took notes and whatever, and then they can point to Jiddu Krishnamurti and say, see, this guru expert in spiritual matters said that this is all quantum stuff. So anyhow, just laying out the metadata so that everybody has the connections. Then you've got also going on at the Stanford Research Institute at the same moment, almost at inception at the same time as the ARPANET program, where they're creating the internet. And so you've got Douglas Engelbart, you've got Vince Cerf, but some of the people involved in these programs start to overlap with each other. Well, it turns out that Douglas Engelbart and Vince Cerf had a teenager that they allowed into their lab and kind of mentored into the internet age. You know what his name was?
Steve Jobs?
Steve Kirsch.
I was close.
Yeah. And so we're going to see all these names who turn out to just somehow have congealed totally independently, with vaccine pushback. And, Steve Kirsch, who is, by the way, buddies with Bill Gates and says, oh, Bill Gates just doesn't know the truth of this. He would understand if we got him all the information. He's not a bad guy or anything. Well, okay. So anyhow, there's a lot to go through here.
Jeffrey Epstein took advantage of Bill Gates, Matthew. Jeffrey Epstein took advantage of Bill Gates.
Right.
He turned him into somebody that wasn't who Bill Gates really was.
Yeah, and by the way, Douglas Engelbart was the inventor of the mouse. And what made Steve Kirsch rich was inventing the optical mouse. Did as a student at MIT. And, I like having done math with Steve Kirsch, tried to explain ideas to him. There is no way in the world, in my opinion, in my humble opinion, having sent dozens of my own students to MIT, he would not compare in math ability to any, well, maybe the bottom students that I of those that I sent to MIT.
Well, again, that kind of matches a pattern. Who's the Hedy Lamarr? Who's the woman who's got the packet switching patent for telecommunications?
Yeah.
I think that these people wind up becoming beards for patents. They have a patent. They need somebody to represent. They also need them to go out and become social. They need to socialize certain ideas. And so the way that they actually wind up paying these people is that they'll say, hey, we're going to give you this patent. This patent will deliver a certain amount of revenue to you. There's a stipulation on the patent. If you ever die or anything bad happens to you, then the patent goes back to us. And,
or some foundation that we created.
Or some foundation that we created. Right, exactly. Right. Just in case you slip and fall on a banana peel. But in any case, you'll be able to count on a certain amount of revenue from this patent for the rest of your life.
So now, just to mention, the guy who is the head of the entire program, who was also the head of INSCOM. This is very high up general in the U.S. chain, and he was put there by Jimmy Carter, who let's reminder to everybody, Jimmy Carter. He's not usually mentioned, but he was co-founder of the Trilateral Commission, right?
Well, I think he was a construct of the Trilateral Commission, because the Trilateral Commission actually, I think, according to Patrick Wood and Anthony Sutton, that they formed the Trilateral Commission first, and then they went out and they found Jimmy Carter to kind of
they may have had the plan already, but Jimmy Carter was elected president, and then the Trilateral Commission was formed. But
his entire administration almost his entire administration was trilateral.
Yeah, I'm sure. He was put where he was put by David Rockefeller and Zbigniew Brzezinski. And Rockefeller names are going to come up in this conversation multiple times. But just to mention, if anybody has ever seen that episode with the Jesse Ventura conspiracy stuff, it's Rima Labo, who is the wife of General Albert Stubblebine, who admitted to me taking money from Lawrence Rockefeller. By the way, I got her to admit that. She is the woman who flies into the tarmac and won't leave the airport, but it has a conversation, and it's like Alex Jones has put this meeting together, and it's in a warehouse at the airport, and Rima Labo is talking about how some world leader told her that the big culling is about to take place or something like that, and that there was going to be a vaccine genocide. So that was like around 2009. Meanwhile, I found recording of Ed Dames on Coast to Coast Radio in 1997, talking about how he remote viewed and saw that there was going to be this vaccine disaster or whatever. So it's very interesting that these people are predicting what we saw with the mRNA vaccines, post 2020, a project that is now known as the Stargate Project. As of January 2025, the day of Trump's inauguration, he announces this project, which is coming through Oracle. I'm going to mention this. I might have been the second statistician in the world to voice concerns over safety signals in the data resulting from the mRNA vaccines, I was told personally that all the way back in January of 2021, that Oracle's head biostatistician, Bill Dumichel, said, we already see safety signals, right? And this is Oracle, who is going big, hundreds of billions of dollars big on this mRNA vaccine platform, was immediately aware of safety signals. And what I was told is, as soon as he started talking about it, he got very, very sick. So just mentioning that for the audience. I was told
Mark Hurd was the CEO of Oracle, and he got very, very sick at one point, and then Larry came back. Like, Larry stepped down as the president of Oracle.
Interesting.
And then Mark Hurd, I think, was the president, and then Mark Hurd got very, very sick, and then Larry came back.
Yeah, and by the way, I think that the Stargate Project is what the television show Stranger Things is actually, like, fictionally based on. There are people who go, it's about the Montauk Project, but there's no evidence the Montauk Project ever existed, right?
Mm-hmm.
We know the remote viewing program existed. We know that horrific things happened with children. The reason that I'm bringing this up is, for years, I would tell people, there's something very, very wrong going on with this. There are children being raped, being taught how to rape. That's part of the lawsuit, the lawsuit that was filed in 2021. And I have a brother, and this is, it's a horrible thing to talk about, but he became a rapist, right? And my mother, years after, I was already an adult. I was in my 20s. It was not long before I cut off contact with my parents entirely, but she told me that she thought he had been molested. Why didn't you ever bring this up? He was so violent, in our household. Our household was just constant violence because of him. I mean, I took a lot of beatings, but it was worse than that. He was taught methods of torture, right? And, and wound up just being a monster later on. He's dead now, but I think he became, he got involved with both the Dixie Mafia and the Rainbow family. And those are both, intelligence associated, CIA, military intelligence controlled drug dealing operations.
I just wanted to point something out for the audience too, is that I've written a couple of pieces about signature reduction. And one of the things that the intelligence agencies are very good at is giving a new program a name that's the exact same name as a program that they're trying to cover up. So, for example, on the World Economic Forum, there is a program, a World Economic Forum program called Fire AID, which is an AI software development program for, quote unquote, predicting wildfires. And you and I have used technology long enough to realize that AI is a tool, and you could use it to prevent wildfires, and you could use it to plan wildfires. So I find it very curious that after the Pacific Palisades in my home burned to the ground, that they had a fundraiser, and they named the fundraiser Fire Aid, which is spelled exactly the same way as Fire AID. Likewise, you were involved in a program called Stargate, which obviously has got some real dirty laundry associated with it. And my thesis is that in order to bury that so that researchers who are on the internet trying to search for things are trying to look for things that are associated with Project Stargate, they're going to run into movies, Michael Greenberg TV shows, and now they're going to run into Larry Ellison's AI program, all as competing in the information space to be able to find all of those links to the evidence.
Just as one more example of that, Fort Bragg has been renamed Fort Liberty.
Oh
that was just a few years ago, and I think right at the beginning of the pandemic, if I recall correctly. Okay, so yeah, you've got all this stuff going on, and like I wish I could just reach out and find all the other children in the ARE and just talk with each one of them. I've talked with a few. In fact, I talked with two of the women who are in the lawsuit 2 years before the lawsuit was filed, maybe 3 years
Well,
before.
let's build a website.
I mean, I've got so much stuff going on at this point.
We could build a one-page website.
No, let's go ahead and we're probably going to have to move at like 3x speed to even get to the connections here.
All right.
But okay, so I think we've given kind of an overview of the most important metadata, and maybe you can drop this link in the let people see
in the show notes
later. So what does this have to do with the pandemic or Jeffrey Epstein? Like I said, Oracle's has called their vaccine platform research AI stuff, the Stargate Project. And I do think that this was intended from the beginning. And part of the reason I think it was intended is because, I personally heard Albert Stubblebine talking about some sort of like a big vaccine death toll or something like that when I was a kid. But there are a bunch of things that are involved now that I realize I heard as a kid. Like my dad, at the dinner table, he would talk about all kinds of things that related to remote viewing. But one day, he was telling us how, we had like a 300 baud modem. Eventually we had a 2400 baud modem at home, but we were learning how to use this modem when I was a kid. And I don't know how old I am at this moment. I don't know if I'm 7, 8 years old. It's a very vague memory, but he brought up the idea that money would all be transmitted in this way. Just like we're getting on and participating in these forums or playing a game. There was a game called Trade Wars that me and one of my brothers would play that was over these modems going to these bulletin board services. But
I remember that game. I think you could play that game on AOL. I think.
Funny, I was going to a BBS that was called America Online, and this was run in Alabama. It was, and the name.
Well, I think that's where Steve. I think that's where Steve Case started. I think America Online started out as a BBS.
No. They purchased the name from a BBS that was in the Birmingham area where I grew up, and then he when he came up with a new name, he called it the Matrix. And this is the 1990s. It's before the Matrix was ever written or came out or whatever. So somebody who understood what to name things. But yeah, he turned down AOL stock in the purchase, and they just bought him new machines. Anyhow, but that was a bulletin board. That was one of the BBSs I was on constantly growing up as a kid. So anyhow, yeah, we were being told essentially the story of digital currency. And so this was clearly being delivered to my father through this network of people involved in the Stargate Project. And of course, I mean, that has to be conversation that was going on at ARPANET, right? There's no way in the world you have all these smart people in a room figuring out how to transfer information over the internet, and not one of these very smart, genius people goes, what about money? I mean, there's just no way in the world, right?
Right.
So, I think anybody who thinks otherwise, and it turns out that naval intelligence is all over Bitcoin. There are Bitcoin projects where the people who are like involved behind the scenes are all naval intelligence or Navy people in general, at the very least. Some of the token project NFTs. I've met the managers of these people, and I mentioned, and I go, I think the Navy has a lot of involvement, and they go, oh my God, it's all Navy guys.
That makes sense to me. But I was introduced to Bitcoin by my ex-business partner, who I believe was just an ONI asset.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So moving forward, so that's the rundown. And during the pandemic, part of the reason I started paying attention to Scientology and starting to realize, oh my gosh, this connects to so many things that were part of my childhood that I got away from when I left, when I pushed my entire family away. So I call it the first Stargate Project and the second Stargate Project, but both of them have this theme which ties back to technocracy and transhumanism. You've got Theosophical Society, really connecting to both. Science. What made me notice was when I did the research on the military health database, when I was the statistician that was asked, can you review this and say what you think? And I didn't match the story of the whistleblowers about, these monstrous increased percentages and all the adverse events. There are definitely bad things that happened, right? Definitely cardiac problems or whatever, but they wanted to say that there was like 1,000% increase in injury and illness in the military. I'm just like, no. We would see that data elsewhere, first of all, but I was skeptical. But they also wanted to claim that, like, there was a massive fertility concern, which I just didn't see in the data. But what I realized was that there were, Scientology people who were there, who were part of this. The lawyer who brought the whistleblowers forward was Lee Dundas, who was a Scientologist. And I just kept making one connection after another. All these people around Kennedy were Scientologists. And this includes Michelle Ford. It includes, his chief co-attorney is Michael Baum, who was an unindicted co-conspirator when 5,000 Scientologists infiltrated the U.S. government back in the 1970s, right? That's his chief co-attorney. But there are a bunch of Scientologists around Kennedy. And then there's several Scientologists around Trump, including John Cole, who was one of his attorneys. And John Cole was recently made Ukrainian ambassador of all places too, right? And there's a whole bunch more. I've done an article on this, and I'm sure I didn't even reach all the names. But there's also clearly this, military connection as well. A lot of people don't know this, but the first U.S. cases of COVID are actually on 3 naval vessels in 2019.
Interesting.
And it's the Navy that was always involved in testing of biological warfare stuff, like Operation Sea Spray, where they, sprayed bacteria into the Bay Area just to track it. All these MK Ultra things that keep popping up. And of course, Oracle, just the name, right? Just harkens back to all of the mythologies that the Masons and the Theosophists, point to very directly.
Right. And a lot of people don't realize that the Oracle was a scam. It was a magic trick. It was, right. They'd get girls hopped up on drugs who would babble on. And then again, my definition of magic, an intermediary would show up, a priest who would do the interpretation of whatever the babbling girl said. And my guess is that the reason that they had a babbling girl is because she was probably scantily clad and, writhing around. And that wound up becoming a way to get what's the hypnotic, you get somebody into suggestibility by building rapport. Like it's a rapport building thing. You get the person all kind of hot and bothered, and then the person's babbling, and then you wind up doing the interpretation, and they're much more open to the suggestion.
Yeah, and it's easier to do when people are making offerings of babies to your temple.
Right.
And you can, raise the child completely traumatized and divorced from society, so they have nowhere else to go, nothing to do. And,
it's a sociopathy manufacturing process.
Not only that, but it's trauma-based mind control, right?
Yeah.
The oracles were early trauma-based mind control, even before the Hashashim, the assassins, and all of that. But I noticed like Falun Gong, which, by the way, runs the Epoch Times,
right,
is a neo-theosophy organization that looks exactly like Scientology and exactly like the Theosophical Society, wrapped in a sheen of Taoism, right?
Right. Again, you take self-evident, wrap it in a mystery, and put in your intermediaries.
And they're the ones who are running projects for Steve Bannon, who was, of course, reporting to the Secretary of the Navy. He was naval intelligence. A lot of people just don't realize that's his origin story long before, anybody knew him as a media figure or a guy on Wall Street or, Seinfeld or whatever. Seinfeld being a Scientologist. Interesting connection.
I think he was like the senior subordinate to the chief of naval operations.
But the person that he's connected to, of course, we know now that Steve Bannon was very associated with Epstein for years. But also Steve Bannon was in business with Brock Pierce,
Right.
the child actor who grew up and interestingly was arrested in a via with child porn and guns, and the other two, he kind of got a pass, while the other two guys there, were, I guess they ran off. I don't know if they ever went to jail, but like they,
Well,
were arrested by Interpol and maybe convicted. I don't know.
But it just seems if people look at what's interesting about you bringing this up is that James Corbett just in the last couple of days did an interview with a guy. I should go pull it up, and they were talking about Brock Pearson on the show quite a bit, so that Brock Pierce was involved in something called Digital Entertainment Network. And his two co-founder, and he was a kid at the time, and his two co-founders were.
You're talking about the interview with Aaron Day.
Yeah, Aaron Day.
Yeah. That's I watched that.
Yeah, it was really, really good. I highly suggest it to anybody who are kind of like Bitcoin maximalists. If you want to get a dose of reality about what's going on with Bitcoin. I thought that was quite a good interview.
It's a good interview. I think I agree with Aaron Day about like 80% of what he talked about. I still think well, maybe I shouldn't get into this because in order to do it right, I have to have a longer technical discussion. But let's go ahead and move forward. And
just for the audience, the name of the interview was "How Epstein Hijacked Bitcoin." That's the title of the interview.
Yeah, and I think that in all of this, I think that Epstein is a tool, right? Epstein is not a mastermind, but he is a tool. One of the things that we found out, within the emails, the Rothschild name came up a whole lot, and he refers
14,000 times, I think.
He refers to himself as representing the Rothschilds, but in particular, the Rothschild that he seemed to be working directly for is Ariana de Rothschild, and she's an interesting figure. Let's see, where do I have the Rothschilds up here? There we go. Okay.
What's interesting to me about her is that she's a woman, and the Rothschilds have never had a woman running anything.
That's right. Not only is she a woman, the first woman running their banks, she's running the largest one. She's running the Edmund de Rothschild investment bank, which is the biggest of all the Rothschild enterprises. And she married in. She's not a bloodline Rothschild.
Okay,
it's crazier than that. She's a woman. She married in. She's not Jewish. She's Catholic. Okay, let's go a little bit deeper. Her father worked for, is it called Hoekstra? Actually, this is important. I'm going to redo one of my graphs here to bring up the Rothschilds. I think this is really, really important to understand because it's a really weird mystery that kind of breaks apart what people might think about the Rothschilds and their position within whatever the globalist enterprise society is, right? Whatever we want to call it, whatever we want to think of it. So she's German Catholic, and her father, Wolfgang Langner, worked for Hoechst, aka Aventis, which became part of Sanofi, which was one of the drug companies, very, very, very heavily involved, clearly involved in a lot of the politics and what was going on. But Hoechst was one of the components of IG Farben, this Nazi pharmaceutical giant that made Zyklon B that gassed the Jews, right? Okay, so IG Farben was like the Voltron of pharmaceutical.
Well, it's still kind of.
Let me finish this yeah. Because I feel like we're moving too slowly to get to all of it. But there were 5 companies that came together, made IG Farben. It gets called the Nazi company, right? And then it breaks back up into these 5 companies again after the war. So there's what you talked about, which is renaming and signature reduction. But it's really, really, absolutely crazy that someone coming down that pipeline would then marry a Rothschild and take over the very largest of the Rothschilds' businesses. But she married Benjamin de Rothschild, whose mother was also not Jewish. She was also Catholic, and so they got married. And when Edmund Adolpha de Rothschild died in 1997, David Rockefeller stepped in and offered to marry her. He proposed to her. She said no, but wow, right? Wow.
Yeah, that is a wow. Yeah, that's a wow.
But Nadine has been involved in lawsuits with Ariana over like using, Edmund Rothschild's name with some stuff. But real important is we're getting into drug companies, which their biodiscovery fund, funded by the Edmund Rothschild Investment Bank, if I understand the relationship correctly, it started investing in all these different biotech projects. One of them is called Sapien Biosciences. And it's interesting that this theosophist, what's his name? The author of Sapiens.
Yuval Harari.
Yeah, Yuval Noah Harari, wrote this book called Sapiens, saying humans are hackable. And now we've got this mRNA platform, which is supposed to be a platform for recoding genetics in human beings. But Sapiens is involved in AI drug development. What? Okay, that's Project Stargate right there. Stargate is not Oracle.
The new Project Stargate.
Oracle's just the umbrella that can take all these projects and manage them as like a super database. They're the meta database operators is what they are. So yeah, that's who was employing Jeffrey Epstein, apparently, so far as we can see, right? I'm going to go a little bit further. The Rothschild family has been involved in biowarfare for generations, right? The idea that they might be, well, okay, but let's just move a little bit to the left to a guy whose name isn't Rothschild, but is part of the Rothschild family, who is descended from Miriam Rothschild. Oh, that's right. Okay, this is, actually, I'm going to start with Miriam Rothschild. I'm going to start with Charles Rothschild. Okay, because this is a straight lineage, and I didn't even realize that until looking back at the map just now. Charles Rothschild is the guy who came up with the theory that the Black Death was carried to Europe by the Oriental rat flea. He is one of the greatest entomologists of all time. He had a collection of 25 million what insect? Take a guess.
Fleas?
The butterfly.
Lepidoptera.
Yeah, he was a Lepidopterist. Largest butterfly collection in the world.
So that like monarch. Monarch butterflies.
There is a ladywing Rothschild butterfly.
So
butterfly.
So I have a theory about the Black Plague. I can do this very quickly, and that is that it was epistemological warfare that exacerbated the Black Plague, because the rumor that helped spread the Black Plague was that cats caused Black Plague, and so there was a culling of cats in Europe. And it turns out that if they hadn't killed all the cats would have killed the rats, and there might not have been a Black Plague. And so the epistemological component of that Black Plague was that they told everyone that the plague was being caused by the cats. They killed all of there might be analogies that go hand in hand with COVID-19. I don't know. But the peasants went around eradicating all of the cats in Europe, and that exacerbated the spread of the Black Plague.
Interesting.
And that would be epistemological warfare,
right? Or it could be.
Yeah.
That could have been intentional or not.
Yeah, it's a thesis.
So Charles Rothschild had two daughters. Let's first talk about Miriam Rothschild, because she went to Bletchley Park during World War II and was running their biowarfare program. Yeah, and then you've got and she was apparently brilliant, and we're going to talk about her son in a moment, who's brilliant. Panonica Königswarter, I guess she married somebody in the line of Napoleon, by the way, which is itself extraordinarily interesting, right there. But she, oh, there's the Rothschild birdwing. She became the Empress of Jazz. She divorced her husband, moved to New York, and is suddenly like bringing all of these musicians, these jazz musicians, to her hotel room, hanging out with them, giving them drugs, apparently. Right? One of them died. I can't. I'm trying to remember.
Do you know what year this was?
No, I have a graph with some stuff on it, but I'd need to go.
The reason I ask is because it reminds me of I think in the book Operation Gladio that when the Allies invaded Sicily, Benito Mussolini had almost completely eradicated the mafia. He had almost wiped all of them out in Italy during his rule in Italy, and that James Angleton and Wild Bill Donovan actually landed with Patton and went and rescued the remaining mafiosos in Sicily, and that's when they arranged to have a guy named Frank Coppola, which is why I think that Francis Ford Coppola calls himself Francis Ford and doesn't call himself Frank, because there was a famous drug mafioso named Frank Coppola, and he and was it Lucky Luciano were deported back to Sicily in order to run the heroin operations out of Sicily. This is during World War II. That they started spinning this up again, and their target was blacks in New York, and that they had their plan was to syndicate the heroin through jazz clubs in New York. And I think that's from the book Operation Gladio.
Interesting. That wouldn't shock me at all. That's
why I'm asking what year it was.
Yeah, there was this relationship involving the mafia. They lynched people in New Orleans. I mean, they literally walked around with by the way, with signs that looked like the Order of Malta. This was the patch that they walked around with, and they would just, they would do marches through the streets, and occasionally they just pull out a gun and shoot somebody who was black. I mean, it was just like, it was really vicious, just really awful. But this was the Sicilian American mafia that was child trafficking in particular. So yeah. So anyhow, but getting back to the mainline story here, Miriam Rothschild's son, one of her sons or her son, I don't know if it's the only one, was Charles Daniel Lane. And this guy turns out to have done genetic research that is kind of seminal to being able to use mRNA to be part of a gene editing process. And this is my understanding. I have not sat down to read his research, so I'm going to put a question mark there, but somebody wrote an article saying that it was seminal too. So I'm just throwing that out there right now because, wow, doesn't that look interesting right now, given all of the other connections, right?
Indeed.
So, is there more evidence that this is somehow involved in the Stargate project? I think that there is. I mean, for one, we've got this very thick relationship between Jeffrey Epstein and Bill Gates. And you know what? It's absolutely
so you're saying Stargate, you're saying the new Stargate, because again, because of the confusion.
I think they're the same program. I think it's the same program. I think that Stargate, MK Ultra, all of this stuff, I think that it is part of a continual process that is part of like the same. These are pieces of the same operation.
Okay.
So you've got Jeffrey Epstein associating with Bill Gates, and it's very interesting reading some of the emails, including an email that Bill Gates wrote to himself where he's kind of making fun of. Epstein wrote to himself where he's kind of making fun of Bill Gates, right? Bill Gates is being like childish and weird and asking for antibiotics to drug his wife to make sure that she doesn't find out that he got an STD from a Russian hooker or I mean, it's really awful stuff. I mean, it's funny, but it's awful. But it's clear that Epstein doesn't particularly like Bill Gates, right? This is a connection that is that is for a purpose, and I think that getting Bill Gates involved at a level of being able to push money around is a big purpose. And let's even mention this. Bill Gates became the largest private funder of the World Health Foundation. Now, there are a lot of people who go, well, Trump was combating this. He withdrew U.S. $4.8 billion to the WHO in 2020. Yeah,
and that turned Bill Gates into the absolute monarch of the World Health Organization.
Hold on. You've got to hear the second piece to this, because there's constant Trump sleight of hand going on. And people who are Trump fans need to hear this, recognize it, see the pattern. Trump withdraws funding from the federal government to the WHO, and then Congress gives $4 billion to Gavi, Bill Gates' organization, which is funding the WHO. Right? And people could say, oh, they're just thwarting Trump's efforts. There's constantly this, oh, I'm doing this one thing, but this other thing happens. And another good example for people to hear and begin to see the pattern is the tariffs. Everybody, every legal mind that you talk to will tell you that those tariffs were unconstitutional, that they were going to be found unconstitutional. Right? The betting market said 75-25, but if the betting markets were just run by legal scholars, it would have been 95-5. And of course, SCOTUS knocked the tariffs down. But what happened? What was the actual result of all that? The result was corporations raised all their prices in anticipation of greater costs. And they said, well, we're just going to have to pass this on to the consumer. And the American consumers already began paying these higher prices and getting used to them.
Well, Howard Lutnick's sons bet the farm on them being found unconstitutional and reaped in hundreds of millions of dollars as a result.
Wait, I'm sorry. I didn't understand that. How did
Howard Lutnick, who wanted to be the Secretary of Treasury, and Trump made him the Secretary of Commerce, he had to leave his bank that was spun out of Cantor Fitzgerald, and in order to take the job at Commerce, and he turned the bank over to his sons. His sons effectively shorted the tariff. I don't know what the particular financial blocking and tackling was, but when the Supreme Court decided that they were unconstitutional, Howard Lutnick's sons made a huge amount of money.
Interesting. I will look that up and find out as much as I can. We have all kinds of what looks like counterintelligence. I think that stories have come out in the last few days that said, oh, the whole Epstein thing was a nothing burger as far as like intelligence connections go. Whatever.
Yeah, Michael Schellenberg and Michael Tracy are running counterintelligence operations.
I think so. But there's also this guy named Beecher who published an article who's pushing back at the notion that Epstein was even a bad guy, that he was railroaded entirely in all of this, that he wasn't even like guilty or something like that. It seems to be what he's saying. But I looked up who this guy was, and he was a newspaper editor or something like that, who's a British newspaper editor in Kiev. I'm like, okay, British newspaper editor living abroad. That's what, maybe a 90% chance of being British intelligence.
Again, I have to. I always put an asterisk next to somebody who's got an English accent at this point.
Especially in the newspaper industry. So, yeah. But
I say this as having worked as the director of they call it my title is director of the web at Virgin, and I worked regularly with City of London types and people from all over the Commonwealth with every different kind of accent, and I truly learned to understand the statement that Winston Churchill said, where he said that America and Great Britain are two countries separated by a common language.
So, what are some other pieces of this that make it look Stargate Project-ish? Besides Steve Bannon, who we've already talked about a little bit. One is designer babies, and actually, I started talking about this on my recordings on the Locals channel. I started getting attacked over talking about this. This is one of the things that began to stress me out, right? But there was a guy who I held a dinner in Austin, Texas, for Rounding the Earth readers, right? It was like a buy a ticket, come, it wasn't and tried to make the cost equal to the ticket price. But there was somebody who randomly showed up, not a Rounding the Earth reader. He said, he told me when he showed up, he said, I'm not a Rounding the Earth reader, but a friend of mine said I should attend this. So I said, okay, yeah, hey, I'm Mathew Crawford, what's your name? Or something like this. His name is Brian Bishop. And I knew I'd heard the name. I didn't remember where I'd heard it from. He's one of the bigger Bitcoiners, both literally and physically. He's a really big guy. Like, I don't know. He's like
he's big, like Reid Hoffman.
Yeah. Like big in every dimension,
Yeah.
like tall, wide, but he's one of the fastest typists in the world. He's a very good coder, very good technology guy. He is the guy who created, Satoshi Roundtable, right? So he's an early Bitcoiner. So he's going to know, the Brock Pierces of the world. He's going to know, he was involved in the first Bitcoin bank that opened in Wyoming. It was called Avanti. I can't remember what it's called now. He was the CTO there. And he was involved in Ledger X. And there's that X symbolism again, but that was bought by FTX. And it turns out that part of the FTX story is that they were trying to buy an island to put a cloning center on, human cloning.
And Michael Bay made a movie about it. Michael Bay is associated with Epstein.
What movie?
The Island.
That was about a cloning center?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Oh, is it a fictional movie or?
Yeah.
Okay.
And just for you, as long as you're writing, I'll give you some other data. There's another woman who I follow on Substack who was a model / sex slave of Epstein's. And she, I think, has commented that she was regularly drugged and didn't know what was going on around her. And she, at this point, thinks that her eggs were being harvested. So what they were doing when they were knocking her out was not necessarily raping her, but they were, going in and I guess they do that vaginally. I don't know how they harvest the eggs, but they were harvesting eggs, that might have been what was going on Epstein Island. Everybody wants to talk about sexual abuse, but I used to joke when I worked in the fashion business that everything was for sale on the runway, and I wonder whether or not that what was going on at the ranch and on the island was just wholesale egg harvesting.
I feel almost certainly that that's probably the case, and I'll tell you a couple reasons why. So I talked about these neo-theosophy groups, right? There's a spins of them. There's the Theosophical Society, and then all these branches that are like clones of it with a little bit of a different flavor. As I mentioned, Falun Gong is one of those, right? Falun Gong almost certainly had to have been created by U.S. intelligence. Falun Gong complains of organ harvesting in China. I think that they were actually created for the purpose of bringing in, lost people who need a cult, right? Teaching them to exercise, keeping them healthy. And then when some Communist Party official needs a new kidney or a new, a gallbladder or something like that, they just go kidnap one of these people. And I think that is part of the purpose that they serve there. But I think that there's also, probably harvesting of babies. There's one of the neo-theosophy groups that Kanye West, when he got kicked off of Twitter, posted this symbol that it's a symbol of that's worn around the neck of the leader of one of these neo-theosophy groups who was involved in a cult that said that they cloned the first baby and that it was living in Israel. And and they testified in front of Congress. This is like 28 years ago or something like that.
Interesting.
And I'm trying to remember the name. It was a French guy.
Here, why don't you go look for it? And while you look for it, I'm going to remove your thing, and you used the term spin, and I posted this a couple of days ago that Fritz Springmeier, I don't know if your definition of a spin is the same as Fritz Springmeier's, but he calls it a segmented. I know that you have mobs, which is
military occult banking syndicate.
Military called banking syndicate. Springmeier has this term spin, which is a segmented, polycentric, integrated network. And he uses the expression spins of spins in his book, Be Wise as Serpents. I was reminded of that, and I was just wondering whether or not that's the spin that you use. Because it seems like it maps. The other thing that's interesting about it too, when I was putting this together the other day, is that this kind of also matches my 60 degree of Freemasonry cabal thesis, which is that you take 6 interlocking Kabbalah trees of life, and you wind up creating essentially a network diagram that has a segmented need to know command and control structure. That would also fit this definition. It wouldn't be the same chart that this AI created in this graphic that I'm putting up. It would be more like a snowflake. But in any case, this is me filling space so that you can try to go find the Kanye West graphic.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll go. I'll look at, while you're doing that, I'll go look at a question. Somebody said. Michael Charlie 8384 said, researcher, the late Kent Daniel Bentkowski, in an interview with Viscoff, had concluded that the Rockefellers family are the Rothschilds, and they may be or they may not be. And the reason that I would say that it doesn't really matter at this point is that one of the things when we're looking at Mathew's charts that's involved in the marriages and what could possibly be the motivation for Catholic women marrying into the Rothschild family, I would put a little asterisk and say, well, maybe the Rothschilds aren't Jewish, which, you know, all of the anti-Semites in the world would rebel at. But that said, in the United States, I've considered, since I started becoming a researcher, that the JP Morgan Bank was essentially Rothschild USA. And at this point, if not by marriage, because when JP Morgan passed away, his daughter married into the Rockefeller clan, that JP Morgan Chase essentially is the merger of the Rothschild and the Rockefeller financial industry in financial banking, what do you want to call it, empire in the United States of America. And so for all intents and purposes, the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers, but we have to be careful because you were talking about how there's 5 Rothschilds. And one of the things that I've hypothesized on my show that you've told me, I think that I need to be careful of when I'm hypothesizing this way is that what we may see in, I did a show a few weeks ago called, I basically created a thought experiment where I framed the current conflict that we see going on geopolitically right now is kind of the gold-based economy banks versus the new digital economy banks, and they're kind of vying. It's not that they're not trying to achieve the same goals, they are, but they're trying to position themselves to be the top dog, to be the person who's calling the shots in this new economic world. I hypothesized that it may be just the French Rothschilds versus the Anglo-American Rothschilds. And I don't know what you think about that, but
I doubt it. Just given how much I have seen, I think that if there were a split, that one Rothschild side would be coming out and revealing the psyops of the other, right? You've got the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds all over funding these groups that push UFO religion, right? And that's something that people should be aware of. I'm not going to go through all the links right now. People can certainly look up Lawrence Rockefeller, who was funding, at least for a while, Rima Labo, as I mentioned. But I mean, he funded a lot of stuff. Stephen Greer, right, was funded by Lawrence Rockefeller, and the Clintons, Hillary Clinton. So anyhow,
I'm gonna
on the UFO.
Okay, somebody said, are you talking about the Raylan symbol? Is this it?
Yeah. And notice that it's like a Star of David with a swastika in the middle of it. And I think the swastika is a symbol. I hate this. I hate trying to figure out what terminology to use. Right?
I think this is Phoenician.
People talk about when you begin to talk about Jews, suddenly, like, I think people sometimes, like, the people bristle and the word anti-Semitism gets thrown around, right? But it's like a bizarre nonsense way to talk. We should have better language, because there are a bunch of Semitic peoples, and they went in different directions with different philosophies and different religions, and it may very well be that a lot of this stuff is connected to one group that is not all the other. And how is it that and if that one group stands behind the Jews and uses them as a shield or whatever, if there are multiple groups that expanded into the population, I know that the genetic studies on Ashkenazi show like 4 women, like it looks like 4 women produced the vast bulk. But then again, we don't know if there are people hiding among them who don't submit to genetic testing, and genetic testing in Israel is illegal most of the time for most purposes. Supposedly to keep families from breaking up if they have if it turns out some people are bastards or not fathered by the people they thought they were, or something like that. Anyway, there's a lot of stuff that hides and obscures and also like groups people together unnecessarily. Right.
I totally agree. I've been trying to so through Mrs. Heritage History, I have been trying to research. So it turns out that there are many books that were written principally in between 1890 and 1930. There's a ton of books on the Phoenicians, on symbolism, on language, on linguistics. And I've been getting as many of those books as possible. I sent you links to a couple of them yesterday. And I'm having real hard times synthesizing these things with the AI engines, because with the LLMs, because the damn trust and safety BS sees a Star of David with a swastika in it, which is a 3,000-year-old symbol. Okay. And it starts, and it tells me that I violated the terms and conditions, and that I'm dealing with hate speech, or basically it just barfs and won't do it because it sees the symbol and then it decides. I mean, there's a book that I've got. I could pull up the book cover, and it's I think it's Blavatsky's book. I think Blavatsky has a swastika on the cover of her book.
Oh, and, yeah, the Theosophical Society has the swastika on their
right. And so you start trying to research theosophy, and I don't have to convince you that using these LLMs to try to crunch stuff is a huge time saver. Yeah. And you bump up up against the BS trust and safety stuff that the Joker over at the ADL is.
Despite the fact that the swastika is a symbol for peace, supposedly all over the world, and
there's 3,000-year-old versions of it, literally all over the world.
All over the world. I think that they probably came from a common source, and I bet that source was the Phoenician Navy.
Yeah, I think that, or whatever they called themselves. Again, I think that there were, we one of the things that you and I talked about this morning is that my wife and I read the Bible every morning. We read a chapter of the Old Testament, then we read a chapter of the New Testament. And it occurred to me just this morning that this is all tellurocracy. All of the stories that we read in the Bible are all about the land-based conflicts primarily that went on between a bunch of tribes in a certain period of time in a certain geographical area. But we don't have any stories about the naval battles and about the trading and the colonization, all of the other stuff. It's all kind of, constrained. And the fact that we don't have a lot of information about these people that we wind up calling the Phoenicians winds up becoming a piece of metadata. There are huge parts of British history that are just missing, and it seems like even the people who are digging this stuff up between 1890 and 1930, okay, these people are all being minimalized. Their books are impossible to find, and doing
I
research.
think this all relates specifically to the Stargate Project.
Yeah,
I think that there are multiple reasons for it, but I think that the Stargate
right. Is this a Stargate?
Empire.
Is this a Stargate? I don't know. I'm asking the question. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. But well, so specifically in the emails, in the Epstein emails, you've got this guy named Gino Yu, and he's been noted. There's this one email that is really kind of creepy and weird. Let me see if this is the email right here, where he's talking about stage 3 people. She is a classic stage 3 in our model, blah, blah, blah. They're talking about trauma-based mind control, and they're specifically talking about whether or not some people emerge with psychic powers after having been raped as children. Right. This is specific, and I'm shocked that this rape case, right, with dozens of people.
Is this Steven Spielberg's Third Kind?
This rape case in Virginia Beach, which I've written about multiple times, and I have tried to get people, people who are like supposedly QAnon journalists, which I'm sure is almost entirely, counterintelligence and tools, right? Like the only person who even stopped and said, "Wow, that's disgusting," was Ann Vandersteel. Right? Like when you send this to dozens of people and only one person even comments on it, it feels like they're all hiding the fact that you have this, trauma-based mind control. They're all obsessed with Epstein, but none of them are obsessed with this other child rape story, right? What's going on? I think they're hiding the fact that it's connection to Stargate. But you've got Gino Yu here talking to Epstein about paranormal stuff, alternate paradigms of coming up with information, and if you read the full emails, it is clear they are talking about paranormal, that the stage 3 people who suddenly have paranormal abilities, right? This is really, really dangerous if you think about it. If governments around the world thought that they could take children, rape them, and suddenly have psychics helping them govern or be involved in warfare. I mean, what an awful message to send. But fortunately,
I think that's probably I think you've got your finger on it, though. I think that a lot of this stuff is purposeful.
Oh, I think that a lot of this is about getting governments getting societies to tear themselves up from within to a degree. But let's go a little bit further here. In the interview between Bannon and Epstein, it's clear that Epstein does not believe in the paranormal stuff. He basically poo-poos magic and that side of things. But what I think is that his handlers had him go, connect all these people, and he's going and having conversations earnestly, right? From the interview with Bannon, you can hear, okay, this is a very smart guy. It's not like Whitney Webb said. Whitney Webb was like, he didn't even finish college. How could he even teach math in high school? No, the people in the banking system thought he was really good at what he was doing, that he was a genius at modeling and blah, blah, blah. And I don't know how top notch he is. He's probably the one who was good enough and also, compromised.
He might have been raped into it.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Absolutely. When he was asked actually on camera whether or not he was molested as a child, he bristles, which you almost never see him do. He turns away and like invokes, and he's like, I'm not going to answer that question. He's constantly invoking his rights during this conversation, during I think it's a deposition that I watched of him. But yeah, he doesn't want to answer the question, right? If he wasn't, he would just say no. So
Right.
you can almost surely assume that he was. But Gino Yu was connected to him through Ravi Mantha, and Ravi Mantha is one of these like Indian gurus, and his client, like he apparently does like therapy sessions, and Epstein was one of his clients.
Interesting.
Also one of his clients, or at least claimed, like on a I think his own website. Deepak Chopra also being one of his clients. I think that maybe he's one of these people trained in psychiatric stuff, but like Scientology doesn't call it psychiatry, but is maybe involved with these people who were trauma-based mind control projects themselves.
Right.
But we of course have the Deepak Chopra email. I don't know if it said like something like, magic may not be real, but cute girls are, or I don't know what it was. It was something like that. But
have you used Ian Carroll's web tool?
Oh, absolutely not. Ian Carroll's team has been photographed with Brock Pierce, right? That strikes me, that screams honey trap to me.
Okay.
I think that it's another
because he's got the 3.5 million emails hooked up to an LLM, and it's free at this point. It's at the web.
And then they'll know exactly who searched what.
Yeah.
I wouldn't recommend people use that. I know it's tempting. But I feel 98% sure that Ian Carroll is a counterintelligence project. So
fair enough.
Anyhow,
I don't know.
I think once
I get accused of being counterintelligence all the time. So
but I mean, like, it's like people going and associating with Epstein after the story already comes out, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you don't have to know who Brock Pierce is for too long to begin hearing the stories about him, and the whispers are worse than the things that are made public, right?
Sure.
Like the moment, and for anybody who's watching to know this, he started a media group that tried to buy out my Substack in 2021, and so actually I met him like
Brock Pierce.
Seconds. Yeah, Brock Pierce.
Yeah.
And so he created this media group run by this guy who ran James Heckman, who ran Maven Media, which had an interesting relationship with military intelligence that was scrubbed later from the internet. You can't even get the pages anymore from the Wayback Machine. But Maven Media was over sports. It included Sports Illustrated in its portfolio. It also included the History Channel, the All Aliens All the Time, Ancient Aliens All the Time History Channel. But he's a former C-suite Fox executive who became CEO of these other various media groups, and then he was brought in.
Wait, what was his name?
James Heckman.
Heckman.
And his right-hand man, by the way, is a Scientologist. That's what I'm told by one of the doctors, anyway. But they started, get the name of the media group they started, Roundtable Media.
Yeah, you can't make that up.
Yeah, you can't make that up. It screams British Empire Milner Group, right? So, which I didn't know at the time. Somebody reached out to me and said, will you talk to these people? And I wound up having, some Skype conversations with James Heckman. And I was very standoffish. But I talked to a friend who was in media, and he's like, "Oh, these are once in a lifetime opportunities, blah, blah, blah." And so I was like, "Okay, I'll go to San Juan." I'm curious to meet all the doctors anyway, because there like 8 doctors were coming, and I was going to come and I was going to be the statistician among the doctors and whatnot. And it was a very, very fishy experience from head to toe, and I'm not going to go into all the details, but they very, very quickly pushed me out. But one of the doctors was sent to JFK to try to ferry him money offer him money from Brock Pierce. Not JFK, RFK Jr., Bobby Kennedy Jr. Bobby Kennedy Jr.'s people, one of his people, which I don't trust Kennedy at all, but one of his people came to me and asked me about Brock Pierce. Because they were talking about offers of money or whatnot. So anyway,
I put up the I put up the Howard Lutnick thing because Jessica found this. Howard Lutnick's family firm bought up the rights to the tariff refunds for 20 to 30 cents on the dollar after Liberation Day last year. Today, the Supreme Court struck the tariffs down. For every $100 invested, Lutnick's sons made 3 to 5 times. So they were shorting their dad.
Yeah, that sounds like a controlled show right there. Okay, so when I went to San Juan to meet this media group and the doctors, first conversation I ever had. I'd never met Robert Malone. Never, didn't know much about him other than he was supposedly the inventor of the mRNA transfection method. Right, he was the first person who successfully did it in a lab. But I get on get in a van. We're heading to Brock Pierce's mansion. I have my first conversation with him, and in that conversation, he asked me why it was I was paying attention, or knew to pay attention to all this stuff. And I said, it may had instincts about it at the very beginning, but in truth, some of it related to my childhood experiences in the remote viewing program. And I explained to him what the remote viewing program was, and he doesn't say much about this, but he's listening, he's soaking it up. Well, a few months later, the Malone Institute is formed. Maybe a few weeks later, right. I think late 2021, the Malone Institute is formed. And I didn't know this for a long time until I saw an interview that he did with this woman that he hired into it. But the Malone Institute, you would think it would be concerned with combating mRNA vaccines and making information available or talking about science. No, it's about remote viewing. What the hell? Make it up. You can't make that stuff up, right? Here's this guy who's supposedly, on the side of pushing back against this, when what he's doing is promoting the original project Stargate, which makes no sense relative to his background. He's also going to Davos with a Scientologist, one of the most interesting people in the world to be a Scientologist, a guy named, so Robert Malone, inventor of the mRNA transfection method, gets invited across the pond. He's walked into Davos with this guy who is part of that whole circle. Who's this guy? His name's John Mappin.
John Mappin isn't John Mappin connected to Candace Owens in Britain? Yeah.
Yes, he is. But let's talk about who he is. He's the owner of Camelot Castle.
Right.
He's a Scientologist, but his family has been jeweler to the royal crown for over 250 years.
That's not a money laundering opportunity.
But it's a lot of things. There's so much about the pandemic that says British Empire, right? The nudge units. Right. The nudge units were spun off from British intelligence.
It's called Corona. It's called Corona.
Right, it's the crown virus, right? But the Rothschild connection too now, knowing that they have so much invested in the biowarfare and the gene editing industries, right?
You're bringing up something that I think is really important, and that is that one of the problems, and I'm getting ready to write about this, but one of the things that I think that I have a lot of problems with right now is that once you acknowledge that there's a superstate, it becomes very difficult to continue to make the argument that, oh, this is good for China, or, oh, this is good for Israel, or right. This is good for the Jews.
It reorients your perspective by seeing a new frame, right? It's
exactly
differently. It's not just nations, these geographical places, and then the people within them, and you assume that there's some common link. Well, common link to anything that goes on there, but you have a network state that has nodes all over the world. And right. It operates as a military occult banking syndicate.
Yep. And I just want to read one thing to you. I'm working the next article that I post after we do this podcast is I don't know if you had a chance to look at Melania Trump's. Melania Trump acting as president of the UN Security Council on the yesterday did a 2-hour drop that is a Trojan horse for everything that Patrick Wood has been writing about for 30 years and Courtney Turner has been banging a drum about in the last couple of months. But this is a quote from Melania Trump. From a solitary farmer on a remote Greek island to a quiet genius in Somalia or a dreamer in uptown Manhattan, anyone can read the vast treasury of human knowledge created over centuries, which is now codified and accessible through artificial intelligence. Cough. Is a single digital nation state inevitable? Perhaps this idea isn't so far-fetched, since digital currency and payment systems via blockchain plus AI's massive factual database, cough, is already revolutionizing media and financial markets. We are in the age of imagination, a period when technology can be free and unrestricted by land borders. Indeed, now is the time for our generation to elevate our children above ideology through access to wisdom. So there is this giant, my article is about how this Trojan horse was rolled out last night under the auspices of saving the children and protecting them from violence by using AI blockchain technology. And basically it's a, go on.
A lot of people don't know this, but Brock Pierce works for the United Nations.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look, Brock Pierce's fingerprints are all over all of this stuff. But again, I look at Brock Pierce and I wonder who's controlling him. Okay.
Right.
Because he clearly has MK Ultra tattooed on his forehead. To me,
it seems like he feels like a construct, just like Epstein does.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, I guess Melania is like part of the United Nations education stuff now.
Yeah, yeah, right, exactly. But she I'll bring up a picture. She was president of the Security Council yesterday.
Okay, but specifically, she's working like long term with the education programs, right? The reason I bring this up is one, because that's what Brock Pierce does. He does education programs. And two, the guy who's the head of all that at the UN, the guy who created World Core Curriculum, whose name is Robert Mueller, not the Robert Mueller that we know of that was, you know, U.S. intelligence, right? But a guy named Robert Mueller, who's a member of he was one of the head guys at the current Theosophical Society.
Right. And there was a Robert Mueller who was an attorney general of the United States and a Robert Mueller who was the head of the Gestapo in Germany.
Yeah, but just think about that for a moment. Of all the religions that somebody could be, right? Yeah. I mean, like half the world is Christian or Muslim. There's a bunch of people who don't even call themselves religious or atheist or this, that, or the other. There's this tiny, tiny little speck called the Theosophists. Well, it's more than a speck, but just the Theosophical Society alone, you know, not their spins of spins and all that stuff. And the guy who runs the education programs of the United Nations just happens to be that.
Right.
It's not a coincidence.
And meanwhile, the Secretary of Education in the United States of America is Vince McMahon's wife, who used to run World Wrestling Federation.
Right.
You can't make it up.
One of her people chased me out of Chattanooga, was originally trying to get me to come there to run math programs. And I showed up and suddenly, like, I don't know, like if somebody said something to somebody and they said, oh, this guy is not the person that we want. Like, I was literally going to teach inner city students math and create a program for them, and they chased me away. It was awful.
You had a serious problem, Matthew, and that is that you were effective. They don't like effective people. I can tell you that I think that I failed every loyalty test where I was put in a situation where, you know, there was an opportunity for me to join the club because I was ethical and I was, focused on getting the job done, and the random bits of lure that got the Aconus lures, as George would call it, that got thrown out in front of me, I just kind of was they bounced off of me like bullets on Superman.
Well, since you brought up the technology, the technocracy angle,
Yeah.
I'm going to mention this. Two of Epstein's close friends, one who referred to Epstein as his best friend, was a guy named Turja Rod Larson. And he and his wife, Mona Jewell, authored the Oslo Accords. These were the Oslo Accords were where the PLO
is that where let me see if I remember this. Is this where limiting growth became policy?
No. The Oslo Accords were an accord between the Israeli government and the PLO in Palestine.
Okay.
Right. And looking back at them, I'm sure that the cable television, I was in high school at the time, so I was probably too busy. If I didn't need to read it, I didn't read it. But, it just looks like the beginning of leveling Palestine, making it impossible for the Palestinian people to govern themselves in any way, shape, or form. First, you're just like, well, you're not a state. And then it's like, oh, well, there's the PLO. We'll just deal with them. And you make these accords. But it really just kept removing the barriers for Israel to move in. And then a couple of years ago, you have this, absurd looking, what looks like a staged attack to me. And I think that this is the Greater Israel Project. And what we were talking about with the Phoenician Navy, when you look at what Greater Israel encompasses, it's actually, it goes west to ancient Egypt. It goes east to the Sumerian Empire.
And it's 1,000 mile. It's 1,000 mile DMZ that cuts Africa off from Eurasia.
Yeah. Yeah, you control the crossroads right there, right?
Right.
You control the crossroads. And I think that just like the greater North America, which would include Greenland, which just happens to be part of the conversation today. This is absolutely positively no coincidence, but
have you gotten to the conclusion of what you wanted to talk about today? We were talking about Epstein Stargate. That was our
and we got to talking about we got to talking about technocracy, and you can include with that the transhumanists, and the transhumanists include the Jesuits, the Theosophists. These are the people who started talking about it on a spiritual and philosophical level decades ago, right? And create the noosphere and all this. And we've obviously got a bunch of connections to that. Brock Pierce, I've seen in a video of him talking about sacred geometry. The Chabad people, seem to be theosophically so inclined, or Kabbalists, which is, virtually the same thing. But yeah, at the very least, I've started the conversation. I guess I'll probably write an article at some point, but it'll be more complete and better organized. At this point, I'm sure there are a million directions we can go to continue to talk about things that are more and more tangentially related. And I may have missed one or two of my original thoughts that are links to it, because there's just so much to talk about here, right?
There is.
I guess we could wrap up at any time, or we could drill down anywhere. I'm sure I missed part of the graph.
Well, I wanted to bring up, you mentioned the Bene Gesserit, and there's a guy who follows the channel who's very kind. Thoughts from the Taverna, who wrote this article because you mentioned the Bene Gesserit. And I want to send you, I think I sent this to you already. Let me see. Coming more for silver.
Yeah, I'm just going to throw this out. The person who chaired Trump's first campaign, if I recall correctly, is the daughter of David Rubenstein, who runs the Carlyle Group and heads the Council on Foreign Relations. I know there are all these people who want to tell me that Trump is not an insider, even though, I mean, his uncle, was very, very close to the U.S. war effort, even though Trump's grandfather, who immigrated to the U.S., ran brothels in Canada. But one of his two sons was John Trump, who is the guy who was tasked with following Nikola Tesla's work,
Right.
and then collecting up all the trunks.
I think he was
all
sent
his
over.
property.
I think he was sent over by the FBI. I think the FBI
No,
called him.
He was sent specifically by the Office of Alien Properties.
Okay.
That's the name of the
Alien Properties. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the whole aliens thing, that part of the joke and part of the symbolism within the insider group is that it's not aliens that are taking over the world; it's resident aliens. Really?
No. I look. I'm not. I'm laughing in agreement with you. Yeah.
Oh, and one more financial connection, just throwing this out here. One of the people in Epstein's little black book is somebody named Lisa Belsberg, who married into the Bronfman family, but her brother is somebody I've talked to. He's one of the best quants ever on Wall Street. His name is Sid Belsberg, and Sid Belsberg is heavily involved in Bitcoin. He says he's trying to. He sent me a paper where he wanted me to help read through it and think through it or whatever. But I was too busy at the time. I didn't even know who he was at the time. But he's the inventor of the ETF, which is that thing that has sucked in U.S. investors. Instead of buying stock, they buy this. And now BlackRock and Vanguard and State Street and whoever has all
control all the boards of all of the major
control all the boards of all the corporations.
Yeah.
So one more piece of the monopolistic technocracy right there.
Anyway, I just wanted to read. I just genned up a summary of this article. Okay, so the website is Thoughts from the Taverna. I'll put the link up here. I'll put it in the chat.
Yeah, and Jessica, you can pull down my window if you want.
And let me share this tab instead, and I will pull this down because I know that you're way into the Bene Gesserit. So this is the article that that this guy, his name's Alex wrote. And at one point, I'd love to put you and Alex and Mrs. Heritage History all in the same room, and then just step back and wait. But let me see. I've got a note function here on what do you call it that I can use? Okay, so this I'm just going to read my quick summary that I just put together in this article. Article's reading of Dune. The Bene Gesserit function as a hidden governing class whose power rests on patience placement and long-range planning. They place trained women inside ruling houses as wives. So we were talking about the Rothschilds earlier. Okay. Concubines and advisors. They steer bloodlines through a secret breeding program. They seed religious prophecies in advance through the Missionaria Protectiva. They guard specialized techniques such as the voice, pranu binda control, and truth saying, and they think in centuries, which lets them shape succession, belief, and political outcome without holding formal office. The author's claim is that the Bene Gesserit matter because they embody the power behind the thrones, an intelligence and influence network that directs visible rulers from the shadows. So it's a really interesting article, and it's very in line with a lot of the things that you and I've talked about before. But I think that there's some kind of new and interesting twists that Alex puts in this article.
One of the things Epstein was doing was introducing people to women who would be their wives. He introduced at least 2 Microsoft executives to women who became their wives.
So
if I recall correctly, Donald Trump was present for at least one of those introductions.
So my ex-business partner, who I believe was ONI, because both of his grandfathers were U.S. Navy, claims that his grandfathers were friends with Tucker Carlson's grandfathers, and he introduced me to Charlie Kirk originally. He told me that he was getting ready to be married, and I asked him who he was marrying, and he said he didn't know because his handlers hadn't figured it out yet. Okay. And I have witnesses. So my witness is laughing. So I very much think that this is the case. I look at like Nikki Hilton, and Nikki Hilton is a Rothschild now. Like, again, I don't think the Jared Kushner, Ivanka Trump. We were talking about Carrie Kloss is married to Jared's brother, Carly Kloss. You know, she's a Victoria's Secret model. So was she picked from the runway that was created by?
And there's an Epstein connection there.
Yeah,
she specifically went through Next Management in moving into her modeling career. Next Management was
Next Management, yeah,
by Jean-Luc Brunel.
No,
yes.
I don't think I do not think so. Next is out of Australia.
According to Wikipedia.
Okay, well, I'll go look. I was a photographer at the time, and I still remember the day that somebody came in and said there's a new modeling agency in town called Next, because I laughed because I was in the catalog business, and when you shoot 12 to 15 shots a day, the word that you hear on the set more often than any other word is next. You get done with one photograph and then boom, you're on to the next one. Yeah, look, I was aware of Jean-Luc Brunel's reputation in 1985. There were models that I worked with that journalists from Paris were trying to get in touch with, and they found the pictures of these models on my Flickr page, and they were calling me because they were trying to find out whether or not I could put them in touch with these models, okay, who don't want to talk to them. The models don't want to talk to the media. The models who I'm friends with.
Well, and just real quick, I'm going to read this from Wikipedia. In 1988, Brunel and his brother Arnaud founded the Next Management Corporation, and this is from the Daily Beast from an article.
Okay, well that's news to me. I understood that Next came out of Australia, and maybe what they did is they went to Australia and they.
Yeah, you know, there's a lot of misdirection with, you know, who's who, you know, when these networks of corporations.
But before the internet, before AOL, I contend that the fastest communication network on the surface of the planet Earth was the model dressing room. Because I had models in my dressing room. I worked at a big department store called the May Company. I shot 150 or 200 pictures a week. Peter Duke was the biggest. I hired more models in LA from 1985 to 1987 than any other photographer in Los Angeles. Like millions of dollars a year it went through my studio in just model fees. And I had models in my dressing room all the time who had just flown in from Paris. They'd just flown in from Tokyo. They'd just flown in from Germany. And all the models are sitting there talking about what just happened in whatever city they just came from. And they're sitting there with the gay hair and makeup guys who are all getting them to talk. And they're all, you know, talking about it. And I would just sit in the back of the dressing room listening, you know. And it's
like being the chauffeur in the car when kids in the back will talk about anything. It's almost like you're not there.
Yeah. And I was hearing stories about Jean-Luc Brunel in 1985 about what a terrible reprobate he was, and all of the terrible things that he was doing. Yeah.
Yeah. And what you just said about listening to these conversations, because you're in this place where you can. I mean, this is how I came by a lot of information, but I've always just been good at you know, when a conversation starts or with somebody sitting next to me, just chatting me up, I listen, and I listen unjudgmentally, and I'm I think in all honesty, even if Satan were sitting next to me, I would just let them tell me their story, right? And I've done this a lot of time, like eat dinner at a bar restaurant, and the lawyer next to you or whatever, if you wind up in a conversation, they might tell you the dirt that's involved, and this has happened to me multiple times, and that's the reason I specifically said lawyer. But a military guy who sat next to me and my wife at a bar restaurant one time just up and admitted that he was running drugs. He was a military guy, but he went to Afghanistan and wound up running drugs there, and asked us if we wanted drugs.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people, they I don't know, they feel like they need to confess or something. In any case, we've been going for over a couple of hours, and I want to be cognizant of your time and the audience's time. So if there's any final thoughts that you have, I'd love to hear them. And then if you want to do this again, I'd love to. I was talking to Mrs. Heritage History. I was chatting with her earlier today, and I hope she's watching because I'd love to get you guys in the same room, because she certainly has a lot of insight into the Phoenicians, who I believe
really enjoyed listening to her talk with you.
And likewise, the guy from Thoughts from the Taverna, Alex, I would love to put him and you together. So I know that you've been busy and you've been doing a lot of stuff, and I value your time highly. If people want to learn more about, are you gonna start publishing again, or I'm wondering what I should pimp here.
Well, people can always go see what I've written at Rounding the Earth. I'm waiting. Like literally, I wrote so much that even like sitting down to type would make me feel sick at the end. And right. I was so low in my energy level and my health. I'm going to do it when I feel good doing it, when I itch to do it. But I think that's going to be soon, because right now I'm just like, all these things that I predicted are coming true, and people were just not paying attention. Like now's another time to, get the chance to poke at people and say, pay attention to this now. And hopefully people will get it and realize this is important. It's not, I think that's the final thing to say is there's so much here that we could talk about, but this is hugely, hugely important. And people need to start doing their own, route around the media, and even, don't think the podcasts are any better than the media. No, these are mostly counterintelligence operations that are being thrust at you to confuse you a little bit more, tell you a little bit of truth, get you to trust them, and then not tell you the full larger part of the story. But the people who have been pointing to things that turn out to unfold in a model that is continually correct, those are the people that you should be paying attention to. But you should also be checking them by doing your own reading and research if you can. I know people don't have time, but it is what it is.
Well, that's why, but that's kind of the mission of the Duke Report, is that I try to provide people with as many sources as possible. So if you go to DukeReportBooks.com, there's almost 900 books that I've done.
Read books.
1,500 word summaries on. So if you're unsure whether or not the thing that you're trying to research is in the book, you can read the summary that I've put together, and you can get a pretty good idea of whether or not what you're looking for is going to be in that book. That's kind of the entire purpose that I did that. I've got over 300 half-an-hour podcast versions of books. So again, it's different people consume media in different ways, and consume information in different ways. For people who would rather listen to a podcast, I have 30-minute explainer podcasts on over 300 of the almost 900 books.
Yeah, I don't know how many I've listened to, but I've enjoyed having that.
Yeah, and I have over 200 8-minute videos on the books. And again, I'm not putting this media out there because I think that it's a good replacement for reading the book. You'll never catch me saying, oh yeah, it's better to not read the book. Okay. However, even Mrs. Heritage History yesterday told me that I put together a half-an-hour podcast on a book that I published yesterday or the day before, and she was driving in her car and she listened to it. And she said that she picked up on things in the podcast that she hadn't ever picked up on when she read the book. So, these things are valuable. And the next thing I'm going to publish is going to be my analysis of Melania's a little dog and pony show at the UN yesterday. And because I think there's a lot going on there. So I want to thank you, Mathew. For people who want to find all of this 700 articles that Mathew has written, go to roundingtheearth.substack.com and become a paid subscriber, and then you'll get access to a bunch of stuff. And if you want to support this channel, go to thedukereport.substack.com and do likewise. It was funny. I was number 13 or something in education yesterday, and I posted that I thought that I would be number 78 by sundown, and of course I was, because there's this whole gamification thing that goes on with Substack rankings. You never have any idea why or how you're popular on Substack, but in any case, all of my content on Substack is free, like beer. And if you feel like you're getting value out of the content that I'm providing, I encourage you to become a paid subscriber to Substack. That's how I keep the lights on and keep things going. And I want to thank you, Mathew. And you can come back anytime. You're welcome. And I know that people really like it when you show up and we have these conversations. So thanks once again for coming.
Yeah, I always enjoy talking with you.
All right. With that, I'm going to turn off the podcast, and I'll say goodbye, everybody. And with like.